it could be considered a form of genocide as well.
Yeah.
But
Like I've said, well, if our nation is racist, it's very selectively racist.
yeah,
Because,
it is.
well, think about it like this, because let's think about it this way. I made this statistic. This is a true statistic, but it's and also an analogy. Statistically speaking, if a white man were to drive a car with his black girlfriend and a police stopped him, it would be far more likely that the cop would shoot the white man than his black girlfriend,
Right.
or put him in prison. So apparently our racist system, prefers black women over white men.
Right. In terms of the police shootings, though, the thing that statistically makes you most likely to get shot in a situation is if you have a physical confrontation with the police over your arrest. When you actually go back and look at police shootings that take place during an arrest, they're not pulling people out of their cars, throwing them on the ground, and shooting them, or approaching people in a public place and just shooting them without cause, without any interaction or anything. Um, in almost all of the cases, like once in a blue moon, something very strange happens where a cop has actually shot somebody who was not doing anything and did not fail to comply.
Yeah.
Like there, but for the most part, the overwhelming majority of those circumstances where people in a conflict with the police have gotten shot, it is because the police are responding to either a panicked or an oppositional uh, uh, defensive response when they attempt to arrest or confront the individual. And there are a few instances where a failure to comply is alleged where the opportunity to comply was not given.
Yeah.
And one of those, it has absolutely nothing to do with race. It's disability.
Yeah.
And that is where the accused or the suspect that is being confronted by the police physically cannot hear the instructions the police are shouting at him, and is confused by the situation and doesn't comply because they don't know what the instruction is. And so there are hearing impaired people who have been confronted and shot by police because police shouted instructions at them and didn't figure out from the manner of their response that they were dealing with a deaf suspect who couldn't hear the instructions. And then my brother had a friend who this guy was just kind of a redneck, and he was socially awkward enough that as a redneck that he didn't move forward in time with the rest of society in terms of what is acceptable behavior with a gun in public.
Uh,
So he had I want to say it was a pistol, but it was a handgun. It was not a rifle. It was not semi-automatic or automatic or anything like that. Just a little handgun that he had a friend that he had talked to about the gun. He wanted to show it off, just take it over and say, "Look, here's the gun they got," and they could look at it and talk about it together and everything. He was driving his Jeep over there. It was summertime. He was shirtless, and the Jeep broke down. We didn't want to leave this gun in his Jeep. It wasn't covered. He couldn't lock his gun in the Jeep. There wasn't anything to lock. And so he put the gun down the back of his pants, took the ammo out, and so it wouldn't go off, and just stored it there, and started walking to his friend's house where he figured, he'd call for a tow and a ride home, and that would be it. Well, some woman looked out her door and saw a guy walking down the street with a gun tucked down the back of his pants and panicked. But she couldn't just justify calling the cops. That's open carry. It's not concealed. You can see it. So she couldn't just call the cops and say there's a guy open carrying down the street from my house, because that's not illegal. He's not actually doing anything even suspicious, right? He's out in the open with it. Everybody knows he has it. He's not hiding anything. So what she did was she accused him of pointing it at traffic and waving it around and acting drunk and stupid and stuff. And no other witnesses came forward to say that that was happening, and one guy contradicted her story. But the officer who showed up in response to the call had believed her, and the officer was one who should not have been on that call. He actually was supposed to be when an officer is involved in a shooting where he has to fire his weapon, even if the other person that he fired at doesn't die or get injured or anything, like he fires a warning shot and it hits a wall or something, he still has to go through a process, and he is off the beat for a period of time after that. Well, this particular officer, there was an injury or death involved in his shooting. So, in addition to going through a process and being off the beat during that time, he had a psych eval he was supposed to go through, and he hadn't gone through that. And he was not supposed to be in uniform. He was not supposed to be on the clock. None of that. But he responded because they were shorthanded. They had brought him back to do desk work or something, and there wasn't anybody else to respond to the call. He went out there, and according to witnesses, what he did was he shouted at the young man to drop the gun, and the gun was not in the young man's hands. So he shouted at him to drop the gun. The young man had his hands up, and this confused the kid because he didn't have a gun in his hands, and you can't just drop what's sitting in the back of your pants. And the young man said something along the lines of not understanding what the cop wanted him to do, and he shot him and killed him instantly. And that was a white kid, not a black kid. White cop, white kid, mostly white community. And that shooting did not get widely reported. There was no outrage over it, national outrage over it. Al Sharpton didn't show up in that community and protest the police killing of a citizen. There was no, Black Lives Matter protest, none of that, because it was a white kid.
Yeah, and well, I mean, here's what's funny. Like, people will point out a lot to the black community's distrust for police officers. And I point out this fact, too. If you want to know people that really, really hate the police in large numbers, talk to X.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is definitely true. You look up the, what are they called? Sovereign citizens on YouTube that make videos about how to confront police officers, how to stand up for your rights and stuff like that. A lot of them are not big fans of the cops.
Yeah, and I mean, but here's the thing, personally, I am a redneck myself. And I will say one incident that I had with a cop. It was a nice cop. He knew me because I always went around the store that he patrolled.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was that he had one day pulled me over, and he had said, I got a report that a guy that looked like you, had robbed a store. The guy was wearing like a sort of jacket that I was wearing at the time.
Yeah.
And, I said, look, you can ask me all the questions you want. I didn't do anything.
Right.
I mean, I said, I want to tell him this. I had a joke inside my head because that's just how I am. I said, if the guy looks like me, you should just let him off with a warning. He's already suffering enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I would make that kind of joke too.
Yeah. I mean, so that was the joke that was going through my head. Because whenever I'm in a stressful situation, that's sort of what I do.
Yeah, me too.
And what happened was, like, this was a nice cop. Genuinely nice guy, but, but he's a cop, he has to do his job. So, he pulled me over, and, he asked me a couple questions, and I I said, I'm just walking, like, because I was walking to the store, and he said that, a guy robbed the store. And I want to say, well, if I robbed the store, why would I be walking back there?
Yeah.
But I mean, I didn't say that because I didn't want to start a fight or anything. But, and that's what happened. I remember this is like, because I went to give him my phone that was in my pocket, in order to say, look, this is where I've been at. I have the text messages from my sister.
Yeah.
And what happened is the minute I put my hand in my pocket, he said, take your hand out of your pocket.
Yeah, because he doesn't know that you're not reaching for a gun to shoot him.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I explained to my son when he started taking driver's ed is if you ever get pulled over by the cops, there are some things you need to know to do because of how many people shoot at them. The first one is no matter how small of an action it is, you never do anything without telling the officer what you're about to do. If he asks you for your license and registration, you tell him, I have to open the glove compartment to get those. And so he knows that you're getting into your glove compartment for a reason and not just reaching, because he has to operate under the assumption that if he doesn't know you and you reach into your glove compartment, you might be planning to shoot him.
Yeah, which I mean, I got the reason why I think he was very light on me because, like I said, I consistently go to the store that he patrols.
Yeah, so he knew you, and he knew you probably weren't the guy, but he still had to question you because it was his responsibility as a police officer to do that.
Yeah.
And he still, even if he knew you, he didn't probably know you well enough to be 100% certain that you didn't do anything and you were not going to shoot at him.
Yeah, I know that. Well, I mean, even a person
like that's basically the situation.
Yeah, I know, but even a person that you believe, can't possibly do anything wrong.
Right.
Crazy moment.
Right, and I've seen that happen actually in real life. Somebody that I was one of my best friends that I trusted completely put me through one of the most traumatic experiences of my life over and over again, because there was a level of cognitive dissonance that I had happening and a level of gaslighting that she engaged in that it actually made it very difficult for me to process and evaluate and respond to the situation for about a year until I finally put my foot down,
Yeah.
But yeah, like the person who behaves normally all the time can have something within themselves that they are hiding that comes out in the worst possible moment. That's an extreme version, but there are times where you think somebody's not an asshole in any way, shape, or form, and then you find out that under certain circumstances they have a mean streak, and it might be related to a prejudice or a mental hang up or whatever. But prejudice is basically all prejudices are mental hang-ups.
Yeah,
so.
But I mean, my point of my story was also, look, because I'm both autistic and I'm a redneck.
Yeah.
And, there was no part of me in that interaction with the cop that ever led me to believe, that this cop could not shoot me.
Yeah.
It's not like I said, well, I'm not black. This cop will just let me off easy.
No, that's one of those things that's a myth.
Yeah. I said, because I'm a redneck and I personally know plenty of white people that absolutely hate the cops and talk about being shot at by them.
Well, not to mention the fact that actually being a redneck can make you more likely instead of less likely to be a target for arrest. I think a lot of people don't realize this, but there's a lot of white people who are not country folk or redneck, rural. A lot of urban white people are very prejudiced against urban or non-urban white people, where they have this level of contempt that is quite palpable. You could almost reach out and touch it.
Well, I mean,
And
also the point was is like, like I said, is like I'm autistic and I'm white, but the thing is also say, well, I'm autistic, so I'm afraid that, I'm not good with social interactions.
right.
I'm
But it
worried
is it
and so,
isn't
so I'm worried about like, I'm not going to know how to do the right
right.
thing. That won't get me shot.
It is entirely possible also to run into a cop that would view you in the worst possible light because you are, a rural person with a somewhat southern accent, and like the phrase "white trash" was not invented by black people, right? That was invented by urban whites who are prejudiced against rural whites, and in particular, rural whites that live a lifestyle that is independent of amenities that urban people come to rely on.
It's funny
And
about what's funny about that nowadays is that the rednecks that I know now, it's sort of like white trash is like the N word for them, that they sort like they are offended when anyone calls them that, but
right.
they're telling people that they are white trash.
Well, and it's intended as a substitute for the N word, and it actually relies on the N word to legitimize it. So it's a when you hear somebody get called white trash, the person calling them that is admitting to two bigotries: that they are prejudiced against people who are not white, and that they are prejudiced against white people who are neither rich nor urban.
Yeah, I mean, what people don't fail to realize about, here's the thing about white supremacy. It's not just the obvious that they will hate black people. That's obvious.
Right.
They'll also eat like the white slave owners. Like, it's not just the obvious that they'll hate black people. That's obvious. That goes without saying. But they also hate poor white people just as much, if not more.
Yep, very much so.
Because they,
And it comes out in all kinds of interesting ways. And
to them, they say, well, look, I view my race as supreme, and these white trash people are making the race look bad.
right. And it some of the strange things that you see as means of expressing that the behavior is so completely irrational, like just not wanting to do business with somebody because they have a southern accent, or believing a statement of fact to be false because it's stated with a southern accent. If you say the sky is blue, um, versus the sky's blue, it's you get a totally different reaction from the urban person. They suddenly start looking up to see if it still is or not.
Well,
And
those,
it's not necessarily all city people are like that. It's just a particular breed, I guess you could say, of city people that act like that.
you heard of Ebonics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what people like, people don't like to understand like that. Like, I know many black people that don't actually know the history of Ebonics. Basically,
You mean the
Ebonics.
fact that it's made up?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, all language is made up.
No, I mean the category is made up.
Oh yeah, but I mean, like, I know, but the Ebonics, quote unquote Ebonics,
Yeah.
how it developed was slave owners obviously weren't interested in teaching their slaves English, proper English, and they had a Southern accent. And basically, the black people could only go off the word of mouth of their slave owners who had a Southern accent, and so obviously, since they weren't educated, because they couldn't be, because many laws prohibited that.
Yeah.
They sort of had to. They spoke even more broken English than Southern English.
There was one more factor contributing to that. You also have to remember that in the pre-civil rights environment, people who were white and bigoted, and even some people who were black and bigoted, would abuse black people for sounding intelligent. If they sounded too intelligent, they were accused of being uppity.
Yeah.
And that did contribute, and what really is sad about it today is while that was enforced, like you had to pretend to not know better if you were black under Jim Crow and prior, in order to avoid being abused for sounding quote uppity, which basically it was just a way of keeping people down illegitimately, right? Now
And
today, you will find black people who will castigate other black people for sounding too white.
yeah,
And the critical race theory admonition that terms describing personal accountability that leads to success, economic success, and social success, and stuff like that, that those are white things and that black people should avoid them. That's an attack on black success
mhm,
in the name of eliminating prejudice against black people.
which is stupid.
Right. And it's going to end up damaging our entire society. And
Well,
the people that are going to suffer the most from it are black people who buy into this idea that if they take actions on their own behalf to promote their own economic and social success, that they are somehow acting not black. If they take that seriously and they live by that, it's going to trap them in a cycle of poverty and social, not being ostracized, but being at odds with their community, which is a horrible thing to do to a group of people. And it's actually being done in the name of saving them from racism. But it's one of the most racist things I've ever heard of.
yeah, and the thing that people really don't get, like, there's a side that they don't tell you about, like even if you hypothetically were a white supremacist, you shouldn't support a white supremacy government, because here's the thing that they don't really tell you. Whenever you have the government assign any class of people based on a malleable metric as superior or inferior, what you're ultimately going to end up with is including people that you never wanted to be included and excluding people that you actually wanted to be included.
Well, there is another thing, right? Anytime
Yeah.
a civilization deems a class of people superior to all other classes of people, that superior class that, supposedly superior in scare quotes, but that class of people that's deemed to be superior becomes responsible for everybody else because if they're inferior, they're not as capable of being responsible for themselves as the supposed superior class. Now, when you have that situation, there's two ways that can go. One of them is a feudalistic system wherein the group of people who deems themselves superior and responsible for all of the other people also have power over the other people. And that would be like if you see the progressive left and the progressive right that have deemed themselves smarter than everybody else and responsible for everybody else, they have the power to force everybody to obey them. They're in an advantageous position. But in the situation of an entire ethnic group, for instance, let's say our society came along and actually deemed an entire ethnic group superior to all other ethnic groups and therefore responsible for them. And let's say we took the group that is statistically better at math, right? Let's say we say the stereotypical statistically better at math group is Asians. So we say Asian Americans are superior to all other Americans. Therefore, Asian Americans bear responsibility for the welfare of all other Americans. All right. Now we have just justified our government, which is in power, imposing obligations on Asian Americans to accommodate entitlements of other Americans who are inferior and need somebody to be responsible for them. And our government is an advocate on our behalf. But
Yeah.
we're not doing that with Asian Americans, right? We're doing that with white people. And
Well,
So we don't have the protection that Asian Americans have, where if you said, well, we're gonna make Asian Americans pay everybody reparations for the egregious differences that take place in math class, everybody would recognize that's racist, that's discrimination, and that is actually, since they have to labor to obtain those wages as a minor form of slavery, you can't do that. But since it's white people and there is no historical context of saying any other group oppressed white people in history that people today think of and remember, then we don't have that protection, and people are accepting it without thinking about it.
Well, I mean, what's funny is what I was telling you about how you'll always end up including groups into the superior group that you never wanted to include in the beginning, and exclude people that you actually wanted to include. I mean, you can see that bear out in history, because whenever you look at any white supremacy policy, it always ends up hurting poor white people.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, for example, slavery. Basically, it makes it so it's impossible to find a job as a poor white person, because why is an owner going to hire you if they can get a slave?
Good point.
And this way also, Jim Crow laws. Well, guess who benefited most from Jim Crow laws? Rich companies.
Yeah.
Because they can afford to be discriminatory, because they can eat that cost. But poor white companies that, who they might or may not be racist themselves, but who would still take black money because they like money. But
right. Well, I mean, a chain fast food place would be able to afford to discriminate against a group of people and say that because of your immutable characteristics, you cannot sit in this part of the restaurant. And if you don't like it, you don't have to come in here and eat. Or you can't eat at this restaurant. This restaurant is people without your immutable characteristic only, right? They could afford to do that because they are international. They get business all over the world, and they would be able to target areas without people with that immutable characteristic, whether it was black, white, having buck teeth, blue eyes, freckles, being 6 feet tall, whatever. If you're 6 feet or over, you can't come into this restaurant, wouldn't bankrupt any company that is big and international like that. But a mom and pop diner is limited in its customer base to the people within its community and anybody within the surrounding community that likes their food so much they will travel there to eat. But they're not necessarily going to be getting people coming from halfway across the country to eat there, and they don't have a location halfway across the country to capitalize on that population. So if they come along and say, this segment of our community cannot come in and eat here, they have just limited themselves to the degree that they're cutting out a big segment of their population or their customer base.
Well, like I was saying, is so like I was saying, like slavery basically made it illegal. I mean, it didn't make it illegal, but it made it almost nearly impossible for poor white people to get jobs.
Right.
Jim Crow laws basically penalized poor white businesses, and
right.
and the voting laws, that the voter literacy laws, while they were intended to target black people, they also had the effect where they discriminated against poor white people who couldn't afford the education either.
Oh, actually, they targeted poor white people. Don't kid yourself. The way that the voting discrimination happened was actually quite convoluted.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that there was a poll tax. It was, if I don't want you to vote, maybe the person ahead of you, their poll tax is 2 cents. But if I don't want you to vote, your poll tax is $500. Right. And then the other one is, all right, the literacy test for the person in front of you is what color is that red truck down the street? But the literacy test for the person I don't want to vote is please spell anti-disestablishmentarianism backwards in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Right. So that's it targeted Black people primarily. It also targeted other minorities. It targeted lower income people that the elite in the South did not want to vote. And, of course, it targeted anybody who had moved their residence, because you had carpetbaggers and stuff that moved south to take advantage of the economic downturn and such. Now, it doesn't change the situation. Like, what it did to Black people was egregious, and what it did to everybody else was egregious. It's even worse by the fact that it targeted a wider scope and larger number of people
than we
but
thought.
Even if it hadn't, it would have been a terrible thing just on the basis of the prejudice behind it when it attacked Black people.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, like, I always like to point out is, like, so I would say, if you were a poor white supremacist, person in the South, it would be in your best of interest to not have a white supremacist government.
Right.
So it's in fact, the argument could be is like, you don't even have to make the racism is bad argument. You could say, hell, if you're a racist, you still shouldn't want this.
Right. Well, and then when it comes to racism and issues like that, there's other things that arguments people have made that I think are kind of stupid.
Yeah.
One of them is, in order to combat racism, we should limit what people say. My answer to that is, how do you know who the racists are if everybody speaks the same way and you don't learn what people are really thinking?
Well, that and also, what also it does is, like, it doesn't actually prohibit them from saying it, is they just take it underground.
Right, they do take it underground. And the other, but in addition to them taking it underground, that means you are denied the ability, the opportunity to use your right to freedom of association to say, if that's your attitude, fuck you, I don't want to do business with you, I don't want anything to do with you, leave me alone. I'm going to hang out with these other people. I'm going to do business with these other people. You're a piece of shit racist, right? You won't be able to do that because you won't find out. You don't know they're a racist if they can't express it, if they don't demonstrate it. And of course, if there is no expression of it and people are trying to figure out who the racists are based on things like so-called microaggressions and shit like that, then you end up in a situation where somebody whose intentions are perfectly good, who is not prejudiced against anybody, but who maybe looks like they've made a